All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into what has got to be one of the most rigorous, scientifically demanding, and honestly, completely unhinged behavioral experiments ever designed. We're talking about a test built to push human mental fortitude to its absolute breaking point. In the literature, it is known as the Focus and Balance Endurance Challenge. I know. It sounds like the setup to a really bizarre joke, right? Like, can we actually measure the true limits of human perseverance, that raw grit that we all desperately want to have, using nothing more than a magnifying glass and a unicycle? On the surface, the whole premise is just absurd. But researchers specifically use this highly unorthodox, chaotic setup to strip away absolutely all external support systems. The goal was to isolate the participants' sheer, unadulterated willpower. So, Phase 1, the ultimate willpower test. This was all about forcing people to fight their own instincts. Let's break down exactly what they had to do, because the parameters are wild. The participant has to balance on a unicycle exactly 2 meters away from a wall. Taped to that wall is a tiny, practically microscopic .6 font text. You have to read this text through a 5 times magnifying glass. But wait, it gets so much worse. The handle of the magnifying glass must physically touch your lips the entire time. Why? To track hand tremors. Oh, and if you get frustrated and let out even a tiny ah or a sigh, disqualified immediately. You have to maintain this exact, agonizing state for 5 straight minutes, all while keeping track of your own word count with a little thumb clicker. The cognitive load required just to survive this. It's just staggering. Moving into Phase 2, introducing our 5 unique participants. Researchers wanted to see how totally different personality archetypes handle this pressure. As we go through these, seriously, ask yourself, which one of these are you? First up, we've got the analytical archetype, a guy in his 20s they dubbed the silent engineer. At minute 0, he is taking this incredibly seriously. He's literally calculating the optimal refraction angles of the magnifying glass lens. But by minute 2, total collapse. He loses his focus, falls right off the unicycle, but, and here's the best part, instead of getting back up, he just stays down there. He starts using the magnifying glass to analyze the microscopic structure of the dust on the floor, just mumbling to himself about how fascinating it is. Ultimately, after 5 minutes of failing to balance, he gives up. But he absolutely refuses to blame his own lack of focus. Instead, he formally concludes the experiment with absolute, deadpan certainty, stating, "A system with more than 3 degrees of freedom cannot be controlled by a human." You see, he didn't fail. The laws of physics simply disallowed his success. Next, we have the competitive athlete, a woman in her 30s. She hops on the unicycle with total confidence. Around minute 2, she starts to lose it, but her core strength is so insane she practically surfs the unicycle to stay upright. But then, the sensory isolation hits. Her muscular spasms cause her to start spitting rapidly, turning her into this dizzying ceiling light show. And then, she finally falls right at the finish line. The reason? Her belly button felt a little ticklish. Seriously. But the absolute funniest part of her attempt was her primary distraction. Right in the middle of this incredible athletic display, the magnifying glass hovering by her lips caught her eye. She entirely lost her train of thought, stopped what she was doing, and genuinely asked the researchers, "Did my nostrils always look this big?" It perfectly captures how a massive physical challenge can just be instantly derailed by a sudden, highly magnified insecurity. Okay, subject number 3, the anxious perfectionist. She kicks things off by meticulously sanitizing the unicycle seat and the magnifying glass. As the text starts blurring, the panic sets in. By minute 3, she is literally crying from the stress. But her willpower is honestly terrifying. She refuses to stop. And to make sure she doesn't break the rule about not saying ah, she starts vocalizing her reading progress with these rhythmic, mechanical typewriter sounds. Just click-clack, ding. Astonishingly, she actually hits the reading goal in just over 3 minutes. But instead of celebrating, her perfectionism completely takes over. She immediately turns to the researchers and says, "I don't know if I did it, or if I was just lucky." Then we have our final 2 profiles, and it is just sheer chaos. The humorist immediately gives up on reading, uses the lens to read his own palm lines, sighs that he's never going to be rich, and then loudly asks the room if this is actually just a durability test for his hip joints. Meanwhile, you've got the teenage idol fan. She gets on, uses the lens to admire her own eyes, fully hallucinates that the text says "I love you" instead of "the difficulty of static equilibrium," and crashes after exactly 3 seconds trying to perform a K-pop choreography routine on the unicycle. I love this because it brilliantly exposes the human ego's defense mechanisms. When the humorist finally falls flat against the wall, utterly defeated, he dusts himself off, looks around, and proudly declares, "I gave up of my own free will." He frames his complete and utter lack of balance as a deliberate philosophical choice. So that brings us to phase 3, chronological chaos. Let's look at how this broke down over time. When researchers zoomed out and looked at the collective data, the mental collapses happened in these highly predictable yet totally insane stages. At 30 seconds, cognitive avoidance kicks in, people desperately searching for tiny bugs on the floor. By 90 seconds, delirium. One subject actually spent their time scientifically analyzing a neighboring participant's glutes, noting that they were vibrating at exactly 0.5 hertz. Around 180 seconds, panic sets in, usually triggered by the terrifying sight of their own magnified eyelashes. And by the 300-second mark, you get complete system failure. Participants would freeze like statues from muscle cramps for 20 seconds, randomly whisper hello, and then just collapse on the floor. All right, phase 4, the tiny success rate. Let's look at the actual numbers. When the dust finally settled and the tears dried, the results were incredibly sobering. A staggering 96% of participants failed. Only a tiny, tiny fraction, roughly 2 to 5%, actually managed to stay on the unicycle and read the text for the full 5 minutes. It is basically an impossible task. But this tiny success rate, that is exactly what sets up the real psychological twist of this entire explainer. Phase 5 brings us to the illusion of willpower. Because here's the big secret. The entire challenge was a Trojan horse. It was an elaborate farce, hiding a really uncomfortable truth about human achievement. See, we absolutely love to attribute our success to abstract virtues, right? The successful 4% were told they had strong will, but in reality, they just had naturally gifted proprioception or inner ear balance. We call it unshakable focus, but medically speaking, their nervous systems were just super stable because they happened to skip their morning coffee. We praise their sheer perseverance when the deciding factor was literally just the friction of the non-slip leggings they randomly decided to wear that morning. The study proved that success in this challenge was dictated almost entirely by hidden, random variables. Think about it. A master yogi with 10 years of intense balance training will fail 100% of the time if the floor happens to be a bit slippery and they didn't sleep well the night before. Meanwhile, someone who hasn't exercised a day in their life might succeed simply because they wore cotton pants that gripped the seat perfectly, their bladder was empty so their core wasn't distracted, and the factory grip on their specific magnifying glass was just a tiny bit stickier than the others. And this is the ultimate psychological takeaway. The researchers found that the successful participants universally fell victim to a massive attribution error. Despite winning the biological and environmental lottery, having the right pants, the right room temperature, the right innate nervous system, these successful participants genuinely believed they achieved the goal because they just wanted it more. They entirely falsely credited their own willpower. It really forces us to completely reevaluate how we judge our own successes and, honestly, the failures of the people around us. We love the narrative of sheer grit, but so often we are completely blind to the invisible advantages propping us up. So I'm going to leave you with this to chew on for the rest of the day. Think about your latest big win. Was it really the result of your unbreakable willpower, or was it just the friction of the pants you decided to wear today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it completely changes how you see your own daily victories.